Hello guys! In Laravel projects, one of the most common tasks now is to interact with third-party libraries and external services, like for example, sign in with Google or in any form ask AI to generate something like generate some text based on other form values. In this video, I will show you examples of both of them. But we're not talking about just implementing that in the code. Also, we need to set that up to be able to test that locally on staging server or launch in production. Also, while working in a team, we need to set those services up in a way so it would not break the code for our teammates and they would be able to set them up on their machines. So this is exactly what I will emphasize in this video. So among other topics, we will talk about environment files like .env and .examples, then automated tests and how to mock some classes, and also interfaces with design patterns to choose which service for third party to use and how to structure the code for that. And this video is a part of our newest course about Laravel project process. You can see it on the left side. So we finished that course. We started that in November. And if you haven't watched the videos about the first part of the course, they are on YouTube. So there's Successful Laravel Project, the process part 1 and then part 2. I will link both of those in the description below. But now we have finished and released the second part of this course, which is about the process from having a project on staging to actually launch everything live. And this is again more about process of that within the team than actual code. Because a lot of courses are about writing the code, but they have missing part how to perform all the tasks around the code. So from that second part, I decided to shoot here on YouTube for free 2 lessons related to third-party providers and external services. And the link to the full course will be in the description below, available for Laravel Daily Premium members. So let's start with a lesson about signing in with Google and how to set that up properly. The code for that is relatively straightforward. So Laravel has Socialite package to set up the authentication with Google, Facebook, or whatever you want, but there's quite a lot of work around it. So this is the list, the plan of action. So installing Socialite and adding controller and routes is pretty straightforward. But then working with third party, we need to configure Google provider, setting up project in Google Identity, and have basically API keys for that we need to put in our .env file. And also more complex things, how do we test that locally and on staging server? How do we write automated tests? So step by step. So we install Laravel Socialite, we configure Google provider in config services. So it's not just .env file. You should set the variables in the config and not just .env. Also configure Socialite auth, and then you need to have these from Google. Then a few things to set up in the database and in the user model. Then Socialite controller, we do have a separate tutorial with more detail, so I will just quickly run through that and wouldn't even stop. So we have routes for that, for the start of that social login and callback for successful login, and add a button using Laravel Breeze Blade components in both login and register Blade. So now we have that button. The next part, the next important part, is setting up Google Identity and testing it locally. If you want to test some external service locally, you need to expose your local URL, and one of the most popular tools for that is called ngrok. So you install ngrok. These are the alternatives to that if you want to, and then you run the command to expose that URL. Your URL will be different and you will see something like this. And then you will have the URL that you need to put in your env file as app URL, and you will use that URL in Google panel for credentials. So when setting up those credentials, you need to put that URL as callback in authorized redirect URIs. And that's it. Then our Google sign-in should work. The next part is writing automated tests. How do you do that? This is the code of our past test file. So Socialite has a method called swap. So you can swap the driver with something like this, kind of faking the redirect with provider Google and also faking hard coding the user data to log in with. Then you get social login and assert that the status is 200 and assert that the database contains the same user. And finally, preparation for staging and production environments. All you need to do basically is fill those values of .env.example with different applications set up for your local, staging, and production environments. and also different applications for every developer on their local machine. And that's why .env.example is very important. You need to have empty values but provide the keys in that file, because that file is pushed to the repository for others to see, so they would know which keys they need to put in their .env files. So they basically copy the keys from .env example to .env and then filling with different values. Without .env.example, they wouldn't even know what keys are supposed to be here. So yeah, this is one example of external API, which is Google authentication. Now let's go to the second example, OpenAI. So this is the lesson and this is our goal. We have some fields in the form and there is a link or a button, ask AI to generate the text. In this case, we're talking about newsletters, and the goal is to generate the header text and footer text from the list of links, basically summarizing them. And in this case, we will use OpenAI API to do that, but with the idea that you may use any external service in the future or even swap between different services. For example, if you run out of capacity quota limit for your OpenAI API and may switch to different AI provider or local service. For that, we immediately create the structure. First, enum class for what other providers may there be in the future. So we have OpenAI, but for example, we reserve the names for other providers, which we'll not implement for now, but at least we will know that there are other possibilities. Then we create a service class with two methods, getHeader and getFooter. And then provider will be one of the parameters to those methods. Again, this is one of the ways to implement that, but the goal is to pass the provider as a parameter of some kind, to be able to in the future pass another parameter, another provider from controller or anywhere else. And then you have match, for example, or you can do if else or switch or something like that. And here immediately we use the same enum class and call getHeader from that specific class. So this is kind of the general service class to choose which of the services to use. This is in app services text generation. This is a subfolder which would contain the general text generation service, and then all the services that would all implement the interface of text generator. So we define that the rule is that the service should contain two methods with parameter of user ID, which user to take the links from in our case, and the result should be string. Then we create the specific service which would use OpenAI. And in here we have app services, the same subfolder, and OpenAI. And here we implement text generator interface, which means that we need to define those two methods, getHeader and getFooter, with the same parameters and the same result returned. And in here we implement that with OpenAI. We have the prompt, which is in the blade file, and then there is a method called OpenAI, so that interface-based service classes may contain private functions. The rule is just they have to have those two public methods, but you can create separately more methods, like call OpenAI, for example. And here we actually call the OpenAI API. This is our prompt in the blade file, but we can use blade not only for views for the web, we can also use that for prompt. This is prompt for footer. And then the last thing to do is in env file, put OpenAI key. And of course, do not forget .env.example again with empty value, but the key is still present. And put that in config services, for example, create a new array key. And here again, we think about other services in the future. So AI is the group and OpenAI is just one of the possible external providers. Then in the controller, we use that text generation service class. We type hinted and then we check. If the text is header, then we call text generation service getHeader, otherwise getFooter, and we have provider as a string. Of course, we need to validate that the provider is within those text generation providers, and this is where that enum class is useful. It participates in the validation of potential values. Then this is the route for that controller, and then this is the blade file with the button generate text, which is just plain JavaScript without any JS frameworks. We call text generation route with post and get the result and put that as header text or footer text. Now, automated test, how do you perform that? In this case, we need to use text generation service, but kind of fake the results, avoid using the actual AI API. So for that, we use mockery mock, with this instance, which basically means whenever we call text generation service, the result of that would be that during the code, whenever getHeader is called, it should return generated header text, just a hard-coded result. And then we do that post, we assert that it is successful and that the text is as expected. Same with the footer. We mock the service class with the provider of OpenAI value. Again, this is where enum class is useful. And then we run our test, which is successful. So yeah, with these two lessons from that course, what I wanted to show you is how to basically deal with external third-party APIs in Laravel application in a way so you would not break the application for other teammates and also would be prepared to switch the current service to other provider or kind of fake provider to test it locally or on staging server without actually calling the external API. Again, I will repeat, this is just one way of implementing that. You may structure the files and the classes and the services differently, but the main point is to constantly think about other teammates and how would that application work on staging server, on production, not just locally. And this is the overall message of that course, Laravel project process from start to finish. So after a few months of teamwork in our Laravel daily team, that full course is already released. So if you want to read that in full, 20,000 words from what I remember, I will put the link in the description below. What do you think? Would you have done anything differently, as I often ask at the end of the videos on YouTube? Let's discuss in the comments below. That's it for this time, and see you guys in other videos.